I wasn't happy with the plain old watch strap that comes with the watch. I did a trial run, and while I'm happy with the overall product, it's a bit too thick and doesn't work out quite as well as I'd hoped. I had a little bit of an issue getting the horse to split down the way that I would have liked, and wound up using a rotary tool to try and skive it down that way. It seems every time I try and pull horse through a blade, it wants to dig in and cut the piece of leather in half. What I did was I thought about it all week long, and I modified the table for a 4 by 36 inch belt grinder. What we need to do to get started with this is measure the buckle and the watch adapter to get the actual size that we need. And these should come out just at or just over 24. The method that I'm going to use to thin down the leather is going to stretch it a little bit. So what I want to do when I'm preparing these is cut the pieces a little bit wide, not too wide, but enough to be able to trim it down to final size. So to prepare this, I'm going to cut them longer than I'm ultimately going to need. And because we're going to wind up using some red lizard, this needs to be backed. It's a little bit too thin, a little bit too stretchy just to use by itself. And for that, I'm going to use an offcut of some, this is about 4 ounce import veg-tan cowhide. We're going to need to thin this down as well. It is 4 ounces. If we take a look, it comes out to about 1.4 millimeters. The horse comes out just over 2. Ideally, I'd like to work with this as 0.9 and this is 0.8 or 0.9 as well. By the time we add the lizard in, that'll give me about a 2 millimeter thick watch strap. Essentially, the only modifications I did to this was to remove the support table and slip a piece of CPVC pipe over the end. I lock this in place, and it's not the exact distance that I want. So here in a minute, after I make a pass or two, I'm going to use a piece of cardboard to back up the leather to get it closer to the belt itself. This is a 36 grit belt, and it takes the material off nice and quickly. I did try using some finer belts, and what I ran into was more of a burnishing effect. So I'm going to start it up, feed the end in a little bit, and then slowly advance the material through as I hear the sound change and I feel the pull lessen. That'll wind up making for a good first pass. Then I can work it back through, make sure that it's completely level, check it, and then add the cardboard as a shim to bring the leather a little bit closer to the belt. We'll keep checking it until we get the final dimensions that we're after. And we'll come back inside and cut out our pieces and begin assembly. So I've run these through several passes, and if we take a measurement, they're all down right around 0.9 millimeters. I need one more piece of leather to pad underneath the lizard skin to raise the center of both watch straps. I'm going to do this at half the width of the final strap, which will give me plenty of room for stitching. So this will be glued to the strap. When we lay the lizard over, we'll make sure to tuck the edges in, and that'll give us a nice raised section in the middle. So now we need to measure the length. And for the long strap, we're going to be at 125 plus another 15. So this will give us 140. For the shorter, the buckle side, we need to come to, remember that's 80 plus 15 plus 15. So we need to come to 110. So we need to come in and find where the spring bar is going to go. I mentioned when we measured it that we were going to give it 15 millimeters on the back side. I'll go ahead and mark that on the inside here, where the spring bar is actually going to go. And what we'll do when we begin assembling this is place the spring bar, fold over, glue, and stitch. Then we'll thin down this edge as well. The buckle side, we need to measure in 15 from each end. One for the buckle and one for the lug. Now, I do want to make a mark on this side as well, because we are going to be placing the padding. And I only want to run that to where it begins wrapping around. So if we're going to have a spring bar here, fold that over. Make a mark there. I only want the padding to extend up to about here, and then what we'll do is we'll just smooth the end or ease the end in to where there's not a lump that winds up going between the strap and the watch. Now on this end, I'm going to wind up bringing the surface of the strip down, because we're going to have a keeper here, and this is where the other side of the strap is going to come through. I don't want a whole lot of bulk here. On the long part, at some point we need to start holes, and this is going to wind up through the buckle underneath the wrist. So I'm probably going to wind up keeping that to about the full thickness, only roughly to here, extend it to here, but taper it down to almost nothing. We'll skive that end down nice and thin. We'll need to center these up and make some reference marks for when we glue them in. Alright, so let's go ahead and mark these. That way we can line them back up after we apply the glue. What I'm using is barge cement that I've thinned down a bit to try and give a little bit more consistent thickness where I'm gluing. With those thinned out, we'll go ahead and get our lizard ready to apply. Mark out where the holes are. And out of this, I can still get a couple of good straps. So since the hole's over here, I'm going to make sure that the long side is on this side. I'll set the rest to the side for our keepers and for another project later. So we'll go ahead and line these up, and then I'll flip them over and make some marks on the back of the lizard. That way we know where to apply the glue and where to adhere it to. So as I lined that up, I made sure to press it down from the center first. Once I had the center pressed down, I was able to get the outside, and then come back with a scrap piece of leather to go ahead and ensure that this is tucked in nicely, pressed down firmly all the way around. If this was regular leather, I might use a bone folder or something else. Being an exotic, I prefer to use something a little bit softer, yet firm enough to still give me enough pressure. So we have those two. Go ahead and flip them, trim them up, and we can proceed. I have another brush here that I just used for water. And get our 1.3, 1.4 millimeter hex key. And we're going to do this, but we'll open this side back up so that we can mark out and punch for the buckle. So with that there, I'll go ahead and take my pen and make a nice mark of exactly where we're going to go to with the end. And again, this will make it a little bit easier for the glue up. I'll do the same for this one as well. Let's go ahead and glue the ends. And for the first keeper, we're going to glue the end of this and line it, and then we'll be able to have the full thickness. We're not going to line this one just yet because the first keeper is actually going to go under the lining. Or when you add the keeper to it, the lining actually needs to be slightly longer to accommodate where it has to go over the keeper. Just need a little bit of glue this time. I'm just barely going to cover over the line. If you see inside, I'm not going all the way into the area that I burnished, but right up to it. On the long strap, what we're going to do is we're going to take the lining, trim and skive one end, and apply it, and then trim it out once it's glued on. Because of the keeper on the short strap, we're not going to be able to do that as easily. So we're going to need to get it to fit a little bit more closely and begin to finish some of the edge before it's glued on. All right, so with the glue dry, let's go ahead and get these folded over and secured. I'll put my Allen key in there. Go ahead and drop that in there. Get our key through. Yep, that is a nice snug fit. So I'll still leave a little bit for when we sand it and finish the edge. Now I'm going to thin this end down, but I'm not going to thin this end down because when we go and put the keeper in here, I don't want it to dip in and then come back up. So the keeper is going to be about as thick as this right here. The lining will come up over the keeper, and this will wind up nice and flush. We'll get this lined up in here. You can see that if I left this the full thickness, it'll wind up giving us a bit of a bump there. So I'm going to skive the horse down, but I'm also going to thin the leather across here. We'll go ahead and glue this up and then trim it to fit. Alright, while that's drying, let's go ahead and glue up our keepers. I don't have a point punch. What I'm going to do is, after we've gotten this down to the correct width, I'm going to use something circular but much larger than the distance from side to side and meet these directly in the middle. And that'll wind up giving us a nice English point. Rather than trying to thin this with a knife and cut 1/2 millimeter off the side, I'm going to go ahead and use the rotary tool again and sand the edges down, stopping to measure frequently. Alright, so now with that down to width, we can begin on the edges. All I'm going to do for now is take a very small edge beveler and take the edges off of the horse side, and then some 320 grit, and just sand downwards to clean up the edge of the lizard. With that cleaned up, let's go ahead and get our keepers glued together. We can't trim it to length until we actually fit it. However, we can split this in half to make both keepers. So we're going to take this down to about 1/3 by the time the edges are finished. The way we need to size these is we're going to line these up, wrap them around the edges, and they'll meet in the back. We have this to size. We need to take about 1 millimeter off of the short strap to get it to fit. So now this piece is going to join in the middle. Wrap around. What we'll do is we'll put a single stitch, or 2 stitches rather, through the back, and then glue this in underneath the liner. I've gone ahead and punched this. We'll put those stitches through, but before I do that, I want to finish up the edges. So similar to what we're going to do for the straps, I'm going to round over the edges a little bit, dye them, and then burnish them. We're going to use our marker, but we need to be sure to angle this back slightly. Some of the dye will carry over. We don't want to get any dye directly on the face. So while we're waiting for those to dry, let's go ahead and find something to mark out these curves on our point. Now, as small as this is, I'm not actually going to stitch this. The glue is actually strong enough to hold the whole thing together. It should hold up fairly well. I am going to stitch the band, however. And as part of stitching the band, we're going to need to have this keeper in place so that we can stitch through the keeper. Before I get there, we do need to cut and fit the lining and do the edges. It's going to be a little difficult to do the edges where the keeper is, so we'll focus before and after, but I do want to dye that piece during assembly before we can't access it anymore. And once we have that glued and trimmed, we'll glue the keeper and the remainder of the liner in place. I'm going to use this 3mm spaced set and 0.6mm tiger thread. And I want to set this in from the edge evenly all around. A lot of times with just regular leather, you put a stitching groove or run a set of dividers to put a line to follow. I don't want to disrupt the scales or damage the surface, so I'm going to go ahead and sharpen up the yellow Omicron that I use and draw a nice fine line all the way around, an even distance from the edge to follow with my stitching chisel. Alright, now all we have left to do is stitch, make the final keeper, and attach the hardware. And there we go. So I'm going to give this a quick buff and a final polish, and then attach the hardware, and then we'll take a look at it attached to the watch.